How's it going everybody, Rival here and welcome back to the channel. Now, I have a simple question. What do you think of when I say controversial Pokemon opinions? Well, controversial topics, especially in the Pokemon fandom, can be a bit of a difficult one. It will naturally stir up some emotional reaction, even more so if you heard a surface level idea. To give you an example, if I were to ask you what's your favourite evolution, then you can't really go wrong with that question. All the evolutions are good in their own right, so if you said that your favourite was Flareon because it had cool hair, then that's completely fine. Now, that's all well and good, but it's not controversial. If I were to say that evolutions are the worst thing Pokemon has ever introduced, Leafeon is terrible and the only redeemable one is Jolteon, that might start a controversial discussion. For the record, by the way, I don't believe that's the case. I do quite like the evolutions. But it certainly grabs your attention because it goes against the norm. But that's got me thinking, what opinions are classified as controversial in Pokemon nowadays? Against my better judgment, I decided to search the internet, Twitter, Reddit, Google, Quora, forums, you name it, in order to find some controversial Pokemon opinions. I had to search high and low. I'm going to outline my thoughts on each one, make sure to comment your opinions down below. Okay, let's get started with the following. Pokemon designs got lazier in later generations. Now, Pokemon has received a lot of criticisms for designs as the years have gone on. Is that justified? I don't believe so personally. When you look at some of the designs of the last few generations, I could definitely see why you might have thought it's got lazier when you isolate them. You know, we've got keys, teapots, and even sandcastles nowadays. But it's been like that for every generation since the beginning. Voltorb is a Pokeball with eyes. Garbodor and its line are literally just trash. I'm never going in expecting like a Final Fantasy Bahamut level design for 100 plus Pokemon a generation. There's obviously some that are a bit more simplistic in design alongside the more intricate and fun ones. Instead of classifying designs as getting lazier, I think Pokemon designs have generally stayed the same throughout the series. We get some good ones and some more simple ones, and for myself I'm completely fine with that, so I'm gonna have to disagree. Two versions is a scam. When Pokemon was in its infancy, the idea of two versions was seen to coincide with the promotion of trading and community within the franchise. This would then boost the success of Pokemon because of the idea that you could play with your friends, coupled with the link cable, which in the late 90s took advantage of the ever-growing idea of connection between players and encouraged them to try and get every Pokemon possible, except for Mew of course. This is why trade evolutions were so prevalent originally, with 4 of the best Pokemon that you could get within the games being available by trade only. This method was pretty successful and definitely played a big part in the initial success that Pokemon had. As the series went on, however, I feel like the justification for this idea is definitely diminished. Not only are fans quite opposed to trade evolution nowadays, hence a lot of fan games give alternative methods of evolution, Pokemon is so profitable and so wide known that an argument could be made that the decision to have 2 games is more in line with the profit than an attempt to promote games trading and connecting opportunities. Now, sure, there are some differences between the games, like the ancient options instead of the future options in Generation 9, or you might have to head to a different location to get your legendary near the end of the game, but usually there's not enough difference between 2 versions to warrant both, especially when you consider most people will buy both versions in the end anyways, myself included. So I can see why you could think this is a scam, and I'd say this leans more towards common opinion than controversial, because it makes sense. Charizard is overrated. You know what, I'm noticing that this is becoming quite a common opinion nowadays, and I think it's important to draw a line between overrated and overexposed. And Charizard is definitely overexposed. Other than Pikachu and maybe a select few others, Charizard is up there as one of the most well-known Pokemon within the franchise. It does help that it's like a kid's dream because it's literally a fire-breathing dragon that's yours, especially when you consider it's mega. I imagine the reason people think it's overrated is because it's everywhere as it's so easily marketable. When you're exposed to something all the time, I mean even down to both Pikachu and Charizard being in the new anime in some form, eventually you are going to form an opinion that you are sick of it. The thing is, if Charizard plushies from Build-A-Bear weren't over £80 and sold out, it wouldn't need to be as pushed as it is. But they are, and it's important to know that. It's definitely best to accept its marketability in my opinion, because it's going nowhere. So I'd say overexposed instead of overrated. Dexit is good for the series. I personally believe Dexit should be used in marketing courses in the future, as a classic case of poor branding and mismarketing. The major issues of Dexit stem from not only its namesake, which is still a very highly contentious decision in the country that I'm from, but also its handling and reasoning not being entirely accurate. See, when Dexit was first announced, it was cited that due to the sheer amount of Pokemon available within the entire series, that the aim was to bring high quality animations and time to the select amount of Pokemon, instead of putting every Pokemon within the game and poorly using all of them. And personally, I think that's a logical decision to make. You would rather have 400 to 500 Pokemon done incredibly well, instead of 1,000 Pokemon done poorly due to time constraints and other related issues. It is also worth noting, despite people associating Pokemon with the gotta catch 'em all catchphrase, this was a Western market idea that was eventually dropped, and was not an idea for the series in general. Now, my personal argument for Pokemon going forward is to have some sort of battle function for Pokemon Home similar to Showdown, so that Pokemon can be transferred from games to that particular hub, and it can have some sort of functionality that allows us to battle them, whilst making old games more easier to transfer, or just making them available on the current generation, which would definitely be even easier. But anyways, that's a different point entirely that I might make in another video sometime. Back to the Dexit thing. I don't believe it was fundamentally an incorrect idea, but the information we were told was in order to make the games better, we had to cut down the Pokemon roster in the games. That way we could assure they were high quality. And if you went off the general reviews and fan reaction, it's pretty clear that did not happen. Instead, we just removed Pokemon from the current generations, and for a select some, just banished them to home obscurity in general, whilst not even improving animations and in fact decreasing functionality in some instances. It could have been a good idea if executed correctly, but when it's half-baked or what it was originally marketed as was a lie, it will naturally get painted with a negative brush. And that's Dexit in a nutshell really. Could have been good for the series? It could have, but it was executed very poorly and handled incorrectly. Funnily enough, I know there's a lot of people who probably felt the same about its namesake too. Or just thought it was a bad idea in general. Anyways, Ash shouldn't have left the anime. This is a bit of a difficult one. I know currently there are some criticisms for Pokemon Horizons, and while I do understand that, I think it's really important to develop and change with the times. And when it comes to the anime specifically, I treat it as a completely different entity to the main series. Ash has been the main character since I was pretty much born, and there's a lot of nostalgia attached to him. Whilst that's great, I feel like it narrows story points as he's already a well-established character, and it unfortunately means that he can't really grow outside what you already know he is now. Changing main characters allows new story perspectives and ideas to be explored upon that you couldn't previously. Similar to Yu-Gi-Oh in a sense. I watched the original and enjoyed it, but when GX debuted in the West, I was in school myself, and it now stands as my favourite adaptation Yu-Gi-Oh has in an anime format, even if I missed the 4th season until years later. Sure, it's not always going to be successful, there will definitely be some hit and misses in the process when having new main characters, but I think for everyone who watched Ash for years, it was great to see him get his moment in the light and then pass it on to the next generation. Bear in mind, he lost that much that he reached the stage where we probably thought he was never going to get over the line, especially Kalos. Ash was great, hard to replace, and even if it doesn't always go right, I think moving on was the best option. Mega Evolution is overrated. Yeah, I'm gonna have to completely disagree with this one. Mega Evolution brings potential and debate to the series, and that alone stops it from being overrated. I think the idea of generational gimmicks that started to happen after that, I know Mega Evolution was in Generation 7, but as generations went on, we started to have gimmicks each time, and I think that might have diluted Mega Evolution's potential. I remember when it was first revealed, and I remember seeing Charizard X and Blastoise's cannons, for example, for the first time. When it was brought back in Auras, we didn't expect it either. Sceptile had a Grass Dragon typing. Oh, and how lovely, Mega Rayquaza. Even better, it could Mega Evolve without an item. Even Morwell had a great Mega. You then start to debate what Mega Evolution could be next. Will Flygon finally get its Dragon Bug option? I really hope it does in the Legends game. Just the concept, possibility, and almost universal discussion that it brings, I think stops it from being overrated. Scarlet and Violet are good games. Okay, this is going to get controversial. I don't fundamentally think that there are any bad games per se in the main generation cycle. Are some of them weaker than others? 100%. Is it important to acknowledge the flaws within the games? Without a doubt. But usually we boil down a Pokemon game to just its bad qualities because fundamentally discussing what's bad generates more discussion than what's good. I can make a video now titled Good Points of Pokemon Platinum, for example, but it probably won't get as much attention as if I made one that was Platinum is the worst thing to have ever existed ever. Talking about good just doesn't generate interest, and everybody is guilty of this, including myself. And I think because of that, Scarlet and Violet gets a bit lost with its positives. Now, that doesn't excuse the issues. Scarlet and Violet has some serious flaws that do need to be acknowledged, especially the performance issues that exist within the game. But we do have some positives that shouldn't be ignored. We now have the freedom to explore a main generation title that's not a Legends game. Auto battling is a great function added. I think we've got a good rival, and I like the Paradox Pokemon. Would I put Scarlet and Violet near the top of the franchise? No, I wouldn't, but I don't think they're awful games either. Plus, no matter how you look at it, it's pretty subjective. Some older generation titles were very criticised and then liked later down the line. I think it's best to look at it in a few years' time and see how it holds up. Speaking of looking at games later down the line, Generation 1 is the worst. Now, I don't think anybody would debate that Generation 1 is incredibly buggy and has aged incredibly poorly, especially with the standards of gaming nowadays. To be able to essentially break the entire game through arbitrary code, while fun when playing an old game wouldn't be acceptable nowadays. Nostalgia definitely plays a big factor in how people see Generation 1, and I think the best way to handle it is to say Generation 1 is what it is and move on. Pokemon was better with 4 kids. Now, when I was making a video and searching around, I was hoping for a 4 kids Pokemon opinion I could discuss. Some may not remember the time of 4 kids, but they used to dub Pokemon along with multiple other big series back in the day, and in fact owned a 3% stake in Pokemon. They eventually sold it off and gave up the rights to Pokemon because they saw it as like a fad that would die out. What a great decision that was. The wondrous times of 4 kids resulted in One Piece's original dubbing, seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Being skipped, and some unintentionally funny localizations. To be honest, it requires its own deep dive. As it relates just to the opinion, however, you know what? I get it. 4 Kids brought the frying pan as a drying pan line, and to be honest, I really did like the cast of the voices of the original. 4 Kids dropped the ball with Pokemon though, so while the voices were good, they definitely threw it away. Plus, I can't hear Brock's original voice without hearing the opening of One Piece anymore. Yo! Team Magma's goal is the most reasonable. Okay, so trying to break this down depends on whether or not we're referring to Team Magma's goal being more reasonable when compared to Team Aqua's, or whether or not it's compared to other evil teams in general. If we're comparing it to other evil teams, then definitely not. Team Rocket wanted more money and more power. Team Yell is a stan of a particular person and wants them to be the best. Team Plasma has false pretense ideas, where some believe in their goals so they join, but the reality is the real goal is hidden. And Team Skull just want to make enough money to survive. All more understandable goals. Compared to Team Aqua, however, then of course it is, but neither Team Magma's or Team Aqua's goals are fundamentally reasonable to begin with. Team Aqua's goal is essentially just speeding up the concept of global warming, which is infinitely worse than Team Magma's idea. Now, while I understand Team Magma's idea to increase the landmass to benefit human society, the damage to the water ecosystem would be devastating. More reasonable in Team Aqua, but not compared to some other teams. Okay, final one, 3D Pokemon games were a mistake. The way I look at this is natural progression of a series. As graphics and technology have improved, Pokemon was always going to make the leap into 3D from its original base. Think of some of the legendary franchises that have also made the leap, such as Zelda or Mario. It's simply a natural process. I don't think it's been a mistake, I just don't think it's been perfectly nailed on yet, especially when you consider things like Zelda. I'm hoping that over time when more games hit that quality standard, that we'll see that 3D games were a mistake, just where the series needed to go in progression. Okay, I think that's me done with some controversial opinions. Now, there's a lot out there and there's a load more I'd love to discuss, but I do want to throw it out to the comments. Make sure to comment down below what your most controversial Pokemon opinion is. And remember, it's important for discussion, not saying that you're wrong. So the more you disagree with an opinion, make sure to give it a like. Make sure to like and subscribe as it really helps on my channel. And of course, follow me on Twitter. See you guys.